All right, guys, welcome to episode 6 of the Mindset Show. I will be facilitating this one. I am Justin Sua, here with two of my dearest friends. We have Brian Miles. We have Lauren Johnson. You guys ready to get after it? Let's do it.
Let's do it.
Okay. Here is the question. For those of you watching, Brian and Lauren have no idea what it is. Here's our tabletop question to kick things off. What's your favorite dessert? We'll start with you, Brian. What's your favorite dessert?
Wow. My natural gut reaction went to tiramisu, but I got to go a little old school here. I used to look forward to Thanksgiving so much at my cousin's house because my mom, it was the only time of year she made it. She would make like a pie crust and then she would put chocolate pudding in the middle of it and then put Cool Whip on top of it. And it was like this chocolate pudding pie. We literally had it once a year. And like I realized as an adult, I can make that anytime I want, but for some reason I don't. And so I need to maybe bring it back into the family recipes. But like when I think of favorite desserts, it is no doubt my mom's chocolate pudding pie. So for everybody out there, now you've got the famous Miles recipe. I'm sure my mom didn't make it up, but hey, that's my favorite dessert.
That's awesome. That's awesome.
Love it.
What do you got, Lauren?
All right. Man, let me just tell you, I have a sweet tooth. So narrowing it down to one is really hard. So I'm going to narrow it down to two. Okay. So number one, probably cinnamon rolls. Hence cinnamon roll Sunday.
Yes.
Every Sunday, my husband and I, we make cinnamon rolls and we call it Cinnamon Roll Sunday. It's kind of like our little thing at the end of the week, or I guess the beginning of the next. And then probably my second one would be creme brulee. It's my mom and I's favorite, like together. So whenever I would travel, especially when I was with the Yankees and I'd go places, I would have to try the creme brulee everywhere I went. And my mom does the same when she's on trips and we send pictures to each other. So I'll narrow it down to those two.
For those of you who you got, Lauren, you always post your Sunday cinnamon rolls and they just mouth watering, look so good. And so that's awesome.
But pro tip,
yeah.
Trader Joe's cinnamon rolls, incredible. Like by far one of my, unless they're homemade, probably awesome. My favorite Trader Joe's.
You heard it here first, everybody. You heard it on the Mindset Show. Trader Joe's. Here we go. Not sponsored by, but love it.
Yeah, right.
But would be.
Yeah.
You know what's so funny is when we're doing these, a lot of us like we're matching up on these. Creme brulee is my favorite. Creme brulee, hands down, my favorite. Same with you, Lauren. I've had some good ones, I've had some bad ones, but it's my favorite. And cookies and cream ice cream. But what's interesting about cookies and cream is I do not like Oreo cookies, but I love cookies and cream ice cream. Weird, just kind of awkward. Yeah.
Just finding out so many things about the team here. I love it. So many things about the team.
So we're going to get into it. So we have 3 questions. And if you've seen episode 5, you know what the questions are. These are great ones. They're great. We can kind of stitch them together. This first one is one that we talk about all the time. You hear it with elite professional athletes. You hear about it with leaders, with parents. It's that F word, failure. It's failure. And the question is, how can failure be a benefit? And this is a great topic because there's a lot of people who watch this and you hear about embracing failure or learning from it, but it's hard. It's a hard pill to swallow sometimes. Lauren, I'd love to hear your words first. And then Brian, question, how can failure be a benefit?
Oh man, yes. I think there's like not a mental coach on this planet that doesn't love this question. And while I can go on forever, I'm going to take a couple things that I really love from it. And I think that if you're not making mistakes, it means you're not trying. But if you're making the same mistake time and time again, it means you're not learning. And so when we look at failure, we can look at the types of mistakes that we are making, the type of things that we are failing at. And the best part, I think, about failure is the opportunity we gain from it. Because there's, not all success is good and not all failure is bad. We can look at it and we can build on our failures to learn from it. And I was actually watching an interview from Jean St. Pierre, a really, famous MMA fighter. And he talked about one of his biggest losses. And what happened was he gets knocked to the ground and he goes, and immediately he got kicked. And he said, I didn't see the kick coming. and I fell to the ground, and immediately I reacted on my emotion. He said I got so frustrated that I just came back swinging as hard as I could, and I lost the fight because my punches, my throws were inaccurate, and his were. And so he said, I look back on that fight all the time because that's where I learned how to become a better fighter. So he said, my next fight, I was put in a very similar situation. I got kicked in the head and I didn't see it coming, but instead of getting up immediately and reacting on emotion, I remembered from my former fight why I had lost. And so what it caused me to do is stay down, weather the storm. And he came at me. I took a deep breath, but I got through the storm and I got back up and I was able to throw accurately and I ended up winning that fight. And so I think that a lot of our failures can actually teach us some things that maybe we wouldn't learn otherwise. And we can learn from our loss and we can become a better version of ourselves because of it. Because whatever failure you're going through might be the very thing that is going to teach you the very skill you need to get you to the next
level. I like
level.
that. I agree. I'm going to come a corollary question I'm going to ask you guys. I want to hear what Brian has to say about this, but so great. How do you do this? How do you implement it? But we're going to come to that. I want to hear what you have to say, Brian. What do you have to say about that?
I guess I mean, Lauren, I totally agree with you. I think all the phrases are out there, right? That you like hear on like Twitter and things about like, oh, like you win or you lose or you fail and you learn, like it's all out there, right? I do think that there is a major component of acceptance in this though. Like high performers don't like to fail. I don't like to fail as a person, as a father, as a husband, as a mental performance coach. I would have to imagine our the players we work with, the individuals, the coaches, the executive, like they don't like to fail. And I always find like this like kind of interesting thing where it's like, oh, like lean into the failures and like, you know, yeah, like failing. Yeah. It's like, no, like I'm not excited about that. Like I'm not going to be like, ooh, yes, I failed. Like screw that. Like I think you should be frustrated and I think you should be angry and pissed off and like you should lean into some of that tension and that emotion and you should find a way to, as Lauren talked about, slow down and use the failure and understanding from it to be able to make yourself a better person and a better version and make better decisions about what you're doing. But I think like you have to sort of first have that acceptance part. And I think a lot of times where the benefit doesn't happen or the learning doesn't happen is because they have not accepted what has happened. And until you're able to accept what happens and handle the emotions, and again, like they're usually not like, they're not like productive for you. Like you have to sort of be able to have that moment in order to actually move forward with it. And I think sometimes that gets missed and lost in translation with like the little quotes and things that we say. But I also think it's important to like, nobody likes to fail. And I think that that's like an important part of benefiting from failure is being able to accept
I completely agree. I think it, to Lauren's point with that story that you shared about St. Pierre, who's one of the best MMA fighters of all time, is what I hear is it's hard to learn from failure. Number one, what you said, Brian, if you're too arrogant to think you're making any failures or making any mistakes. So number one, we do fail. Number two is strong emotions. When you're obviously you're going to be mad, you're going to be angry, you're going to be sad. The sting and the pain of failure is real, and I love that. I think that's missed a lot. It's like, yeah, learn from failure, but yeah, let's not discount how painful it is and how you might need a few days, you might need a few, but and in certain instances you don't have that time. You need seconds to bounce back. But I love what you guys are saying about this is knowing that it does exist, knowing it's painful, and then being able to learn from it. And so going back to the question, so how can it be a benefit? How can failure be beneficial? I know you both said it, but can you give us a little tweetable or can you tighten it up for us? Like, how can failure be a benefit?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Laura, I'll just, I was thinking a little bit about like Alex Honnold in Free Solo, right? Like for any, I mean, I don't want to like ruin the movie for anybody, but like, I mean, he Free Solo is all cap and like, the people that were recording him do it. I don't know if anyone remember, like it's oftentimes like a relatively overlooked part of the movie, but like he goes to free solo it and gets a bit up and then just stops and fails and turns around. Like, he didn't fail in the sense of falling off, but like, he stopped himself from doing it, which he looked at as a failure. And what was so interesting is like, he had the self-discipline to realize to stop in that moment. Now with him, it's obviously life and death, but like, he was able to stop and sort of recognize that space for him, that he wasn't prepared and wasn't ready. Like, that's, I think, that moment, that space is where the benefit happens. You know, it's like, it's the ability to sort of take what happened and really like genuinely reflect on it. And I think that reflection part is oftentimes so overlooked in having intent in a deliberate way to reflect. Like, I love with our players with journaling and stuff. It's like, hey, like, let's objectively write down what happened tonight, right? Like, objectively, like, take your emotions out of it, objectively write down what happened. And then cool. Now, like, let's look at how much of this you actually had control over. And now let's look at like what's actually important in this. Okay, cool. Like, now you have your sort of, you audited your day and you're able to actually look at those failures. And my favorite part of it is like, great, there's your one up, there's your one down. What's one thing that went well? What's one thing that didn't go well? And then what's your one forward? Like, the one forward part is the benefit, right? Like, you're writing down what you plan to do tomorrow to get better. And I think like having that little shimmer of light, that little target to focus on, is where the benefit comes from and where the learning actually happens, because you go into the next day with a target from your failure the night before and you're able to address it. And it almost feels like the little check mark in your brain, like, oh, roger that, failed last night, like, here we go, this is what I'm going to do tomorrow to make sure that it doesn't happen again.
Oh, so good. And I would just say, like, add on top of that, another way, since you talked about how to deal with like current failure, I think when we're prepping for something that's coming up in the future, a lot of times we only prep for what we want to have happen. We only prep for things that are going well, like how we can execute properly, how we can strike this person out, how we can hit a home run. But we oftentimes can forget to think about, what are we going to do when things don't go well? And so I think that's one way that we can use past failure to help prep us for possible scenarios come game time. And so we've talked about this, us three have talked about this many a times, but there's kind of this 1-2 punch that we can use, and we can use mental contrasting, where if you want to know what you want to have happen, like, imagine and visualize, how do you want your play to go? How do you want to perform? What are the things that you want to be doing? How do you want to show up? And then contrast that with what happens if those things don't go your way. If an obstacle does appear, if you do face adversity, and then write those things down. And we can use our past performances, our past failures, and our past successes to help us in both of these visualizations. And then take those things that you visualize that could possibly go wrong and create a plan. Yep. And if this happens, then I will do this. If I'm feeling this way, then I will remind myself of this. And by creating these if-then plans, what we're doing is we're creating a link between a situation and a behavior we want to follow. So Justin, kind of the point that you mentioned is when that emotion comes up, a lot of times it's our natural default to respond immediately to that emotion or react to that emotion. Where when we've created an if-then plan, oftentimes we can kind of create or decide what we're going to do before that emotion hits, so that when it does, we're not having to react to it. We've already proactively created a plan that now our brain's only job is to now execute. And so that's another way I think we can
really like
failure.
that. There's a term that they use in the business sector called a pre-mortem. I think they even use it in the military as well, where it's basically sitting around the room or sitting around the table and asking yourself as a team, how will this fail? Literally, okay, imagine, let's go 6 months down the road. Let's imagine this is a complete failure. Why did it fail? And then you literally try to predict or forecast all the ways it failed. Things that you can control, things you can't control, things that are external, things that are internal. And then, like you said, Lauren, there's your list of things to either avoid or have a plan for. And I like what you talked about in terms of mental contrasting and implementation intentions, if-then statements. You talked about the brain and how our brain, how our brain's wired to help us rather than hurt us. Because when failure hits, we get that amygdala response, the stress, fight, flight, or freeze response, and the amygdala, the bottom-up thinking, and all of a sudden we're panicking, we're emotional. However, to your point, what you guys are saying is you're a lot more likely to respond effectively to failure if you plan to respond effectively to failure. And so when you do fail, your brain's going to be scanning the environment. And right when that thing hits, that adversity hits, your brain's going to say, oh, we prepared for that. We were ready for that. And you're a lot more likely to respond effectively.
It's and part of it's like the like you talked a little bit even more like the imagery, and I say I think sometimes people are so oriented to like imagery for performance of like, right, oh, I'm seeing myself striking the guy out, and it's like, and then when you're out on the mound, you're like, oh, I feel comfortable because I've been here before, and it's like, yes, like you're creating those neural pathways and you're strengthening them using imagery. But you're right, it's like Justin, kind of like what you're saying too, is there's like a sense of comfortability of I've been here before, with like the plan for the failure. Again, like hey, we're not asking you to go do imagery of you failing over and over again. Like that's not what it is, but it is the development of the plan and feeling like you've been there before. So it is kind of like I've seen this and here is my contingency for it. Like you have planned for that, which is again, like very military-esque of like when you have like the sandbox exercises, like the mental blueprints that they're creating of the different ways that they can navigate those experiences. I love because we oftentimes so push imagery for that performance component to it. But it's also like when you're doing the contrasting, you can create the when then situations. And I think that's like the power of it. And like you said, it's the wiring of the brain.
Now the second question I'm sensing a common thread with the second question. It's how do I improve my relationship with difficult? So whether it be stress, obstacles, adversity, failure, which what we're talking about. Lauren, I loved it. I love Lauren for you to kick us off. How do we improve our relationship with difficult?
I think it begins by being aware of the relationship you currently have with the difficult things in your life. For instance, I was actually speaking with a soccer player earlier today, and she was saying how, she goes, we're talking about becoming the best version of ourselves in all these little ways. And one of the ways we're doing that is by just these small details and executing the small things, because we know that they add up to big things. And one of them is just simply tracking what she does every day. And she said, one day I just didn't do it. And it then took me 6 days to even realize I had stopped doing this. And then on the 7th day, I was like, oh my gosh, like, why didn't I track this? I did everything, or I did a lot of things I said, but I wasn't tracking it. And so we talked a little bit about it. And what it came down to, without going into details about what was going on, is that the higher stress she had in her life, the less attention to detail she paid attention to. And so she was more likely to ignore and avoid the small details the higher she experienced stress. And so when we kind of learned this pattern for her, we talked about, again, kind of like what we were talking before, how are we going to plan for it when it comes? How are we going to adjust our response when it comes? And so we came up with a couple ways that we could do that. And that was through different habit development. First of all, you have to know what habits you currently have in response to these difficult situations, whether it's failure. What is your relationship with failure? How do you currently respond to failure? How do you currently respond to confrontation? How do you currently respond to negative feedback? How do you currently respond, and just fill in the blank? And then we can start to develop what we want to happen instead, or what we want our response to be instead. Because if you don't practice it, you can't expect it to just show up when it happens, right? And I think it all starts with our awareness.
Whew. There's a lot in there. We could talk about just that right there, unpacking it. So I feel like there's like such an awareness part of it, right? And like being able to understand our relationship with these, whether it's like our relationship with fear, our relationship with failure, our relationship with struggling. And it is sort of like we create the story and the narrative of our relationship with that. And I think our ability to sort of unpack that and understand like where some of that comes from is super important. And in the same sense too, like Justin got me like wildly primed on the lizard brain now and like the amygdala. And I just like, I can't stop thinking about like how like all of our information is first filtered by the lizard brain. And so like, which is important, right? Because it helps us like detect danger and keeps us alive. But what's so interesting is like what actually triggers the lizard brain, right? When we're talking about like the amygdala, like what triggers it. And like, so like some of the 4 main things that trigger it is like uncertainty, attention, struggle, and change. And it's like, can you define like a more perfect environment of what high performance is besides like uncertainty, attention, struggle, and change? Like that is literally like a high performance environment. And so I've thought about like, you know, this idea of how we have this relationship with fear. And like Seth Godin talks about this all the time on like on some of like the papers he's written, but he talks about how like you can't get rid of the lizard brain, but you can dance with it. And so like his description of dancing with it is so cool, because he's just like, yeah, like, you know, it's there and it's like totally there to help us. And it's like, hey, instead of like being scared of it and like running away, he's like, just dance with it. Just like recognize that this is happening to my body and my brain. And it's like, it's telling me something cool's about to go down. It's telling me that like I'm priming myself for it. And it's like, that's the relationship with it, Laura. Like that's it right there. Like you're like, this is my relationship with fear now. Like this is my relationship with something that's hard, my relationship with challenge. Like I'm going to ebb and flow with this. Like this is pretty cool. Like this is telling me something. Like what a different perspective to look at it. Yeah, I mean, I feel like I'm like about to ready to vibe with my lizard brain, you know? So it's just like, that's it. Like that's, you dance with it. Like you dance with the relationship with fear and the relationship with change and uncertainty and ambiguity. It's like, that's high performance. That's like, I feel like that's like the way that you can kind of work through that. And it's like, that was pretty, it's a sweet tie-in, Lord, of just like, that's another way of looking at like our relationship with it.
Well,
you know?
and don't you think it has everything to do with how you interpret it? I mean, like Kelly McGonigal like talks about this with in the Upside of Stress, great book. And she just talks about that not all stress is bad for us. A lot of times the way that we interpret stress determines how it impacts us. And I feel like that's the same with fear. That's the same with obstacles. You know, we can look at obstacles and flip them on our head and look for the opportunity. You know, there's so many different ways that we can look at things. And I think that does have a big tie-in to also our relationship with it, is also how we interpret it.
I love what you guys are saying. Like when I read that question, how do I improve my relationship with difficult? I immediately went to our relationships with our loved ones, our friends. How do you improve any relationship? How do I improve that? It's with time. It's with respect. It's with going through tough times together, going through good times, seeking it. And I think about all the relationships that aren't as close. Why are those as close? Maybe I don't trust the person. Maybe they don't trust me. Maybe we just don't get along and I try to avoid them, or they try to avoid me, or whatever it may be. And I think some of the same principles could apply to this. If you want to strengthen your relationship with difficult, spend some time with difficulty. Spend some time acquainting yourself with it and experiencing it. And then a lot of times people are afraid of spending time with difficulty because that's embarrassing to fail. When you it'll bite you a little bit. It'll be hard, but a lot of times it'll reveal a better version in yourself. The closer I find myself, the closer I get to difficulty, and the more I'm willing to lean into it. And like you said, Brian, dance with it, do a little salsa dance with it, or hip hop with it, or whatever it is. We're stepping on each other's feet. I'm dreading it. We're off. But you know what? When the song is over, you're like, whoa, I got a little bit better. A little bit. I like it, but let's go do this dance again. Let's go rumble again. Oh, and again. And then you just kind of get used to the uncomfortable nature. You get comfortable being uncomfortable. It's like jumping into a cold ocean and you're freezing at first. And then you kind of get used to it, not because the temperature changed of the water, but because your body got used to it. And I look at the practice of these elite performers. A lot of them, their practice is way harder than the game, or than their training is way more difficult, because they want to accustom themselves with difficulty so that the real thing is a lot easier. And so those are just some of my, I don't know if you guys want to add to any of that, but yeah, that's what I was thinking about when you were talking.
Love.
Yes. It's like and I think what you said too about the relationship thing, like it makes me think, like as I'm getting older, right? Like the relationships that like you're choosing to keep, especially like outside of like your immediate family, it takes effort, right? Like the effort part of it. And I think the effort part of your relationship with like difficult and failure, like you have to seek that out, right? It's not just going to be like, you can easily go through the motions and stay in your comfort zone all day, every day, if you wanted to. And I think that like the effort part is why those people you're talking about, Justin, those high performers, like why they seem different is like they're seeking that stuff out. Like they're seeking out the music to dance with. Like they're seeking out those situations because again, like, I mean, we could have a whole freaking episode on this, just like why they are elite. Like we talked about that last week a little bit about the difference between elite and average. It's like, that is a huge reason. Their effort and willingness to seek out those moments is 100% kind of what drives them in there. Yeah. So I mean, yeah, I'm spot on.
Well, and you know what, Justin, I was looking at it from the other side too, of what makes bad relationships. And the way that I look at it, like, is the inconsistency, you know, when we're not consistent and when we avoid, right? When we avoid failure, we avoid mistakes, we avoid looking in the mirror, we avoid negative feedback. And so I think that those two things immediately stood out to me when you said, you know, why do our relationships not good? And those are the two things that came up to me. It's like people that are inconsistent and they're not true with their word, and they only show up on certain times a year. And you're like, wait a second, there's something wrong here, right? We don't have great relationships that way, or we don't create great relationships that way. But we do when we are consistent and we don't avoid those difficult things that we know are good for us.
That is so true. That is so true. So I'm looking. Okay, let's take a vote. Actually, we're gonna do something. We're gonna do something fun. We're gonna change it up a little bit. You get 1 minute to answer this. You only get a minute or less than a minute. Last question. How do I so yeah, imagine your elevator pitch to answer this question. Here we go. How do I strive for purpose when I feel I'm going through the motions? We'll start with Brian. You're at the first floor. They just hit. They're going to the 12th floor, and they're going to get off. You got this little tiny window, and they look at you. You tell them what you do. How do I strive for purpose when I feel like I'm going through the motions?
Okay. Oh my gosh, I don't need you to do it in one sentence, Brian. You got this. All right. So here's my tagline, right? That I believe that it's true that where focus goes, energy flows. And so I think that when we're talking about sort of striving for purpose, when it feels like the day is monotonous, it is about finding a specific target. It is about narrowing in on truly what is important now, and really thinking about the idea that, like, where that attention goes, your energy will follow, it will flow. And so getting back to sort of the basics of identifying specific and precise targets that you want to achieve, driving your attention to it. And when you bring your eyes and your target to it, your energy will follow. Elevator pitch.
Oof, so good. Love it. So good. Well, that's a hard one to follow up, but I'm going to do my best. So I would start with, when you're feeling like, you know, you're trying to find purpose, when you're going through the motions, is number one is I'm going to go back to identity with who is it that you want to become? Who is the person that you want to become? And, you know, finish that sentence. You know, I want to become the type of person who fill in the blank. And then my next question would be, what actions can you begin to adopt that will support your new identity? And so if you want to be the type of person who runs every day, how can you start running every day? If you want to be the type of person that eats healthy every day, how do you eat healthy every day? If you want to be the type of person that's organized every day, what actions can you adopt that will help you organize every day? And so as you implement these actions that support this new identity that you want, that's, I think, where we can really help to find purpose in the things that we do on a daily basis.
Love it. Love it. That was awesome. In the real world, like, I'm in the elevator with you guys, so I don't have to say anything. But I.
Nice. Nice move.
So for me, it would be as simple as reminding them of a lot of times we can get blocked or feel like we're in a rut because the question is, what's my why? What's my why? My big esoteric capital W why or capital P purpose. And that could be daunting and scary, and you don't want to act because you don't know. I would just tell this person on this elevator ride, you can create a temporary why. You can shorten the playing field. What's your why for this month? What's your why for this week? What's your why for today? What's your why for this moment? And just build momentum. Just create some temporary whys. If you can't see the light at the end of the tunnel, create a temporary light at the end of the tunnel that you can see, and that might be able to help you out. And if not, listen to what Brian and Lauren just said. Thanks for joining us. We're going to finish with good stuff. We what do you got,
Mhm.
Brian? Your Hunt the Good Stuff.
Hey, it's March 29th. I got my Hunt the Good Stuff. Got to give a shout out to my wife, Megan. It is her
Happy
birthday
birthday,
today.
Megan.
We're doing the long distance thing while I'm in
Happy
spring
birthday,
training. Yeah. So, thank you. My Hunt the Good Stuff is happy birthday to my amazing wife who is supporting us at home, watching our little nugget. And yeah, that's my good stuff. Just happy
So
for
cool.
her.
Awesome.
So cool.
Awesome. Today, my Hunt Good Stuff is we got really warm weather and I am loving it. So I will probably be at the lake a little bit later today with my dog throwing the ball because we do that every single evening. It's been our new little ritual. And so I'm thankful right now for just honestly for today. It's been a good day.
That's so
What do you got, Justin?
we purchased some laser tag guns at Walmart. And
I saw this.
I saw this on Instagram. It was electric, man.
On Instagram, it was hilarious.
This was electric.
I go to bed at like 8:30. Like, I try to go to bed early because of spring training. We stayed up till midnight playing laser tag. It was a blast. And so that was our Hunt the Good Stuff. It was fun.
I love it.